Welcome, everyone. Happy to have you here. Welcome to People and Places, People Plus Places, Saving Legacy Businesses. I'm Adrian Scott Fine. I'm with the Los Angeles Conservancy, and we're really pleased that you could all join us here today. We've got a good crowd, and we've got more people joining us right now, so I want to just make sure everybody's in the room. But again, we appreciate your support, being part of this today with us. And if you're not already, please consider joining the Conservancy as a member. We appreciate your support so we continue to do programming like this. And we love our members. We'd love to have some more. We have over 200 people registered for this event, which is great. And that represents more than 60 different neighborhoods, communities throughout Los Angeles County. We have especially large contingents from some specific neighborhoods, so a shout out to some of those. Little Tokyo, we have a really large group of you, and we're really pleased you could be with us, and you're doing some really innovative work around legacy businesses and longtime community serving businesses and how to protect and retain those. And in many ways, you are becoming a model for some of the work that we're all looking at. So thank you for being here. But we also have groups from Glendale, Silver Lake, Koreatown, Los Feliz, Echo Park, Boyle Heights, and Inglewood, among many other parts of the city and the county. So again, thank you for being here. And we also have some friends joining us from other parts in the state, Donna in Berkeley and other states. In Colorado, Connecticut, North Carolina, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Texas for starters. And we also have, thankfully, we're really pleased to have a number of our city council districts joining us through staff and colleagues there from those that we know from Council District 2, 5, 12, 14, and 15. We really appreciate you taking part in this program today. We really see you as a partner in this. And then lastly, we have some of our members of our city's Cultural Heritage Commission joining us and sharing in this conversation. So again, welcome all. Thank you for being here with this program. And I'm gonna just get it started and share a little bit about what we're doing, but also share what's coming up. This is the quick little commercial. We have another People Plus Places program happening very soon, next Tuesday, in this case, looking at Sister Mary Carita, affectionately or lovingly known as LA's pop art nun, and looking at her endangered studio. It's very similar in terms of bringing up questions around cultural significance, questions around integrity, and how do you evaluate that around a cultural resource, especially a place that is mainly derived from its cultural significance rather than architectural. So some similar questions that we're going to be getting into when we talk about legacy businesses today, but we hope you join us for that program as well. You can go to our website to register again next Tuesday. You can take part in that. And then we don't do anything on our own. All of our programming in partnership and collaboration. And we're really thrilled and pleased to be able to bring this program to you today in, again, partnership with these three other entities. The Los Angeles City Planning through the Office of Historic Resources is really a key player in all this. Survey LA identified a number of community serving legacy businesses through that analysis. LA Commons, they say it better than anybody, creating cultural connections, do really wonderful programming around the city, and through University of Southern California, RAP USC, through Race, Arts, and Place. Which is all three of these entities have been looking at the questions around cultural significance, cultural connections. How do we ensure, as the city of Los Angeles is changing, as it's evolving, that the places that we value as community-based assets like legacy businesses, how do we ensure that they are along for the ride? That we keep them, that we nurture them, that we value them, even as the city is changing and growing and developing. And these are challenging questions, but we're all trying to come up with solutions and strategies to get us there down the road. So again, thank you to all of our partners in this process. And then thank you to our two speakers who are joining us. Mike Buehler, who is the new president and CEO of Fort Mason Center for Arts and Culture in San Francisco. but he's been a longtime executive leader of San Francisco Heritage, and really led the effort on the legacy business program there and efforts. And he also has connections to Los Angeles. Many of you know him. He used to be with the Los Angeles Conservancy. So he has a strong connection to what we do and know some of the places that we're working to save and promote. And then we also have Shannon Miller from San Antonio with the Historic Preservation Office there. And she and her office do amazing work. Both of these are, I consider them friends. They're also some of the friendliest people, nicest people I know in preservation, and they're both doing some really innovative work. So we're really pleased to have them join us today. What we're gonna do is I'm gonna do a quick kind of overview of what's happening in Los Angeles. And then we'll go to Mike and then Shannon to kind of share what's happening in their cities. We will then have plenty of time, or we should have plenty of time to have more of a conversation, answer some questions, and engage you all as part of the conversation. So I would encourage you now and throughout the whole program in the Q&A function, rather than the chat function, but definitely in the Q&A function, dropping your questions as they come, so that we can start going through those and getting those ready for when we do have more of the conversation or the Q&A piece to this. So please add your questions to there. Also during that program or that piece, Rosalind Segarra, who is really our project manager around legacy businesses, will be joining us. And she's our neighborhood outreach coordinator. So she's done a lot of work around this work, and we're really happy to have her be part of that, and so you all can see her too. I know a lot of you have worked with her. So just to get started and put this into some context, and I hope Erin Swicegood doesn't mind me sharing this a little bit. She, I believe it's she, sorry, just finished her thesis looking at legacy businesses from the University of Oregon. And it's a really great document. I've read through it. Hope you don't mind me sharing or making a plug for your piece here, because it's one of the more recent documents that really does put legacy businesses across the country into perspective, showing what's happening. And again, you see kind of the cities and places where people are having conversations, doing studies, establishing initiatives or official programs in various cities across the country looking at this issue. So definitely check that out. And so it is a national issue in terms of perspective. The Los Angeles Conservancy really launched our program as we've been working on legacy businesses, but never really had an initiative, but we launched in October of 2019. And then we launched a social media campaign in March of 2020, in part due to COVID, but certainly it was the natural outgrowth of our efforts. And initially what we are doing through this initiative is to raise awareness, understanding, appreciation around legacy businesses, one, by highlighting them across the city, but also sharing their stories about the people that are behind these businesses, and also just raising the appreciation about why these places matter in a place like the city of Los Angeles as we're changing and evolving so much. And it's been one of our, in terms of social media campaigns, certainly one of our most popular in terms of people have really responded to this in terms of they care about these places, we care about them as well. And so it's nice to give some love to these businesses, but also encourage people to go out and support them. And they need it more than ever right now. And I know it's challenging, especially for our restaurant legacy businesses. And so that's part of what we're doing through this campaign and the work that we're a part of. And it's not just restaurants, and it's not just in the city of LA. We're really trying to focus throughout all of LA County and the variety of legacy businesses that exist. Again, looking at businesses that have been in place 20, 25 years, from cleaners to bookstores to nurseries, you name it. They're all part of this large umbrella when we talk about legacy businesses. And we'll get into more about kind of what's the definition and what does it mean to be a legacy business. And we would encourage you to go to our website, look for legacy businesses, nominate your favorite legacy business, or any place like that that you think should be on our radar or that we need to, highlight and showcase in terms of the work that we're doing. We're just, a drop in the bucket in terms of what we've been able to highlight so far. There are so many of these wonderful businesses around LA County. And it really is about this, people plus places. These legacy businesses would not exist if it wasn't for the longtime owners and stewards, and many of them are now our friends, who really do the yeoman's work in carrying on these traditions, cultures, keeping these businesses alive. And that's a really big part of this. We want to support them. It's not just a business, it's people that are really associated with this. And it's highlighting, as we've been doing, some of the variety of these places that are so beloved throughout Los Angeles. Like many people know Galco's in Highland Park, and hearing what people think about these places and why it matters to them personally. People have personal connections to a lot of these places, or certainly Pan's in South LA, fantastic example of Googie architecture, but it's also a wonderful place in terms of just the business itself and being able to go there. And we can't wait till we can go back into that wonderful restaurant environment again, but you can still go and pick up takeout. I had Thanksgiving takeout from Pan's. Or this place in Boyle Heights, fantastic food, fantastic connections, been in place since the 50s in terms of really a community serving business that we want to support. Our work that we've been involved with around legacy businesses, even before we had an initiative, we've been working on places like this to save them. And it brings up challenging questions, from our work at Norms to Tom Bergen's to Alpine Village in the county, which was recently landmarked. It raises questions about, do we have the right set of tools, approaches? Do we need new things in place to really help these businesses? And also this idea of, what is a legacy business, to whom, it has different meanings, different perspectives, and it raises questions about authenticity, living heritage. How do we help ensure a business stays in place versus just being focused on a building? So it's questions like that that we are grappling with. And some of these are very much in play right now, which again raises additional questions that we are trying to answer. Questions like, is it the business, the legacy business itself? Is it the building? Is it both? Is it a one size fits all? Probably not. And then also questions around physical integrity. And how do you determine eligibility and significance for a place, especially a place that derives its significance from its cultural associations? So is physical integrity so important? These are all some of the things that I think we're looking at, and we will certainly get into in our conversation with Mike and Shannon. And then the other piece to this is it's about diversity, social equity, gentrification, displacement, and all of us having a better understanding of the market forces that are either impacting or pushing out these types of businesses, from rising rents to development pressures. How do we grapple and how do we balance that going forward, especially if we try to create some type of program in the city of Los Angeles beyond just having an initiative? And then if that wasn't enough in terms of challenges and things that we all need to think about, there's COVID-19 that is bringing a whole new set of issues and challenges that we're looking at with this in terms of how do we deal with this and how do we keep these businesses surviving even as things are changing so quickly in terms of the world that we live in right now. And then lastly, so you're all aware, the city, through a motion by Councilman Curran Price and Council Member Paul Krikorian, did a motion back in July that instructed the city to look at establishing a legacy business program, essentially. And that was very encouraging. We really thank the two council members for taking the leadership and pressing for that. And we're hoping soon there will be a report. We've heard soon. We're not sure how soon that will be, but hopefully even maybe before the end of the year, that there will be a report that will come forward that will outline some concrete steps that the city could take to establish a legacy business program. We have been working and talking with a number of council offices, and there seems to be a lot of interest within the city, but also within the larger LA community about doing something. And there's already been some programming and efforts happening as part of COVID that have been very critical, like the alfresco dining, allowing restaurants to be able to expand into parking lots and sidewalks so that they can survive to do outdoor dining. But there is the need for greater incentives and programs. And we can talk more about what that specifically looks like. So that's a broad, very quick overview. And I want to share quickly a video that gives you a little bit more background and also allows you to hear more from the people involved, from the business owners themselves. So just one second.
Once non-essential businesses closed, the impact on our daily business was immediate. We saw it. That first week was just kind of devastating. We were like, what are we going to do? Our traffic mainly consists of the LA workforce, blue-collar professional, public and private, and the shutdown of the business was felt instantly in our shop.
I consider Rafu Busan a legacy business in that people have bought from their great-grandparents' time things that they treasure or is important in a Japanese family, but those things are also passed on from generation to generation.
When the Formosa was under threat of being torn down and turned into a parking lot, people rallied. Look at that photograph of everyone in front of the Formosa with picket signs. This is why the Formosa was saved. People need to rally. You cannot just do an Instagram post saying, save this place. You should rally your friends together and march on it. And we have to do the exact same thing to save our landmark businesses.
So great. So I want to thank our communications folks for putting together that video piece trailer. I'm looking forward to the actual movie. It's so kind of inspiring with the music that they included within that. But at this point, I want to turn it over to Mike Bueller from San Francisco to share a little bit about how San Francisco got started and their program. So Mike, take it away. Thanks.
Thank you, Adrian, and it's great to be here among some familiar attendees here from my days in Los Angeles. It's wonderful to be able to share San Francisco's story in terms of the development, the origins of our Legacy Business Registry program, and it's really exciting to see Los Angeles hopefully on the cusp of adopting its own program. In terms of the origins of the San Francisco program, it goes back to about 2013, and there was an issue. There were many bars, restaurants, legacy businesses, before we called them legacy businesses, being displaced or evicted in San Francisco. It's no secret that with the tech economy here, rents frequently skyrocketed, double or triple sometimes the increases. And we were seeing many cultural institutions that were beloved by the community being evicted. And we as a cultural heritage preservation organization really had no tools to respond to those threats. As Adrian referenced, a lot of this surrounds whether traditional historic preservation tools are adequate to protect the full range of cultural resources in our communities. And we found at that time in San Francisco, absolutely they did not. Really all came to a head with the threatened eviction of the Gold Dust Lounge in Union Square in San Francisco, which was for decades a place where many political leaders would hang out, and it had quite a following. And there was a whole grassroots effort to try to save the business from being evicted. It was being evicted so that a chain clothing store could go in the space. There was an effort to landmark the business, even though it would not meet technical preservation requirements and integrity requirements to qualify for landmark designation. And we wanted to help the effort, but literally had no legal means to do so. And that led San Francisco Heritage as an organization to evaluate what programs are in place, not just in this country, but internationally, to help preserve and sustain intangible cultural heritage resources. And that led us to develop a policy paper. It's still on our website, still on San Francisco Heritage's website today, called Sustaining San Francisco's Living History, Strategies for Sustaining Cultural Heritage Assets. And this was really our first foray into intangible cultural heritage. And what that paper did, it kind of acted as our manifesto to justify a historic preservation organization going in, working to preserve intangible cultural heritage, which is so accepted now. Back then, it was very unconventional. And the paper surveyed a whole range of domestic and international case studies of programs that we hope to emulate in San Francisco. One of those programs was called Bares Notables, a program in Buenos Aires, Argentina, that recognized cafes, billiard halls, bars, and provided small grants to help sustain those businesses, including, and they also, the city marketed those businesses for tourism, created a plaque program, et cetera. And really using that as a model, San Francisco Heritage launched its own program called Legacy Bars and Restaurants. And we did that. We focused on bars and restaurants because those tended to be the types of businesses that were displaced most often. They also tended to be the types of places that were most beloved by the community. And we really had modest aspirations for that program at the outset. It was primarily intended to be an public education program. In San Francisco, you hear about the newfangled restaurant every week in the newspaper, but little attention was paid to kind of the stalwarts of our community that had been there for decades and generations. So our goal was to really kind of elevate those businesses and tell their stories. And we started by launching an initial list of 25 bars and restaurants to our Legacy Bars and Restaurants list. And those were defined as businesses that were 40 years or older and in continuous operation and had made significant contributions to their community. So we published the initial list of 25, and it really elicited a lot of public attention, both in the media, and elicited a lot of controversy because people immediately said, well, why didn't you include this business or that business? And which was great. That's exactly what we wanted to do, is to kind of provoke conversation. And that was in 2013 that we launched that program. We ended up doing 4 rounds of 25 businesses until we got to 100, and then we considered individual applications to be added to our list from that point forward. But our program, the Heritage Program, included a logo, a decal program, and really just, again, intended to just raise public awareness. It got the attention of our local supervisor, then Supervisor David Campos, who represented the Mission District in San Francisco. He approached us wanting to sponsor legislation in the Board of Supervisors to create a citywide official San Francisco Legacy Business Registry program. And that was a wonderful call to receive, and we eagerly jumped on that opportunity to work with his office in crafting legislation for the official Legacy Business Program. Unlike Heritage's program, this applied to all kinds of legacy businesses as well as nonprofits. And it was important to the supervisor that it be a low bar to entry. So the age requirement was lowered to a minimum of 30 years of continuous operation, or even less, 20 years if that business faced imminent eviction. And for us preservationists here today, that was kind of definitely not what we're accustomed to, because preservation rules tend to be more exclusive, and they have integrity standards and high age, 50-year requirement oftentimes. And this really kind of turned that on its head in a way and really made preservation accessible and focused on people. And that was a great benefit of this legislation. The Board of Supervisors unanimously adopted the local legislation in 2015. There wasn't much initial interest among businesses to apply because there were no benefits or protections associated with the designation. It was really just symbolic. But a few months later, that fall, there was a ballot measure that was introduced, Prop J, to create the Legacy Business Historic Preservation Fund. And that created a funding source for modest grants to any businesses or nonprofits added to the Legacy Business Registry. And with a shoestring budget, and the campaign was successful, and the Prop J was approved by 57% of voters in fall of 2015. It provided two forms of financial assistance to legacy businesses. One was a modest grant program for the businesses themselves, where businesses would receive grants of $500 per full-time employee up to 100 employees. So that's an annual grant of up to $50,000 for each legacy business in the program. The vast majority were much less than that in terms of those grants. But it also included a grant for landlords of legacy businesses to incentivize them to enter into a long-term lease with their legacy business tenant. So if they entered into a 10-year lease with their legacy business tenant, the landlord would qualify for a grant equal to $4.50 per square foot, up to 5,000 square feet. So that's an annual grant of $22,500. So that program was implemented, and the first few years went quite well. At this point, in terms of one of the lessons learned, now that the program has become so popular with over 275 businesses and nonprofits, the resources, the funding does not support providing that same level of financial assistance in the program any longer. And I can return to that during the discussion. Let's see, one thing I wanted to note about the nomination process in San Francisco, it requires that the local supervisor or the mayor nominate the business for the Legacy Business Registry before an application will be considered. And that is actually, in retrospect, a very important aspect to the benefits of the Legacy Business Registry program here in San Francisco. It means that from the outset, the business has the built-in political support of their elected official. So if there is a threat to that business, or there's an adjacent project that might in some way negatively impact the business, they have the elected official there to vouch for them, to go to bat for them, and hopefully get concessions that would protect the business. And that has played out in many situations for threatened businesses here in San Francisco, where that political support has been really critical. Another important benefit of the program has just been the sheer process of documenting the cultural significance of these places. Not just their contributions to the community, but the physical features and the intangible traditions that really define that business. So if that business, for example, was required to relocate, there would be a full understanding of what features really define that business. Maybe it's a menu item, maybe it's the uniform that the waiters wear, maybe it's the neon signage. There is a full inventory of the things that really distinguish that business. So if they are required to move, or if they want to make improvements or renovate, the owners of that business are committing upfront to preserve and protect those features, or bring those features with them in their new location, to their new location. Finally, I'll wrap up with some key lessons learned from San Francisco's experience now that we're 5 years into the program. The program has really had some unanticipated benefits, I would say. One of them is just the sheer fact of inventorying these significant businesses and nonprofits in San Francisco has created a vehicle for layering on top additional incentives or protections to help those businesses. So, for example, legacy businesses located within a designated cultural district in San Francisco require additional level of approval for any business that wants to move into their space and displace a legacy business. That would require a conditional use authorization. Likewise, although it's not officially recognized under CEQA during the environmental review process, legacy business status is often taken into consideration by our planning commission in deciding on mitigation or changes to proposed development projects that might negatively impact legacy businesses. And one example in San Francisco we had here is an outdoor beer garden where there would have been a shadow cast by an adjacent development on the beer garden itself, which would have really made it difficult to continue their business. The Planning Commission forced the developer to reduce the height of that proposed development in order to avoid those impacts. The legacy business status itself has been a marketing tool that businesses use to promote themselves. And the city of San Francisco has developed a logo for legacy businesses and a website. And I'd say during the pandemic, as is, I suspect, the case in many other cities, small businesses have launched crowdfunding campaigns to help sustain them during the closures mandated by the pandemic. And certainly legacy businesses in San Francisco have used that status to attract public support to keep them open and afloat. And San Francisco Heritage, as an advocacy organization, has promoted many of those crowdfunding campaigns, and that has been a factor in their success. And then finally, there has been growing pains of the San Francisco's legacy business program. And essentially the funding source approved by voters back in 2015 allocated just over $1 million to administer our program, including staff and grants for the entire legacy business program each year. And as the number of businesses on the registry has increased to hundreds, there is not the resources available to continue the small, modest grants that were given annually to the businesses themselves. The city has decided to prioritize the grants to landlords in order to ensure that businesses have long-term lease protection. So that has been a lesson learned, and a more kind of targeted marshaling of limited resources, I think, would be well advised for any city, including Los Angeles, considering this program. So I'll wrap it up there, turn it over to Shannon, and answer your questions during the discussion time. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here this afternoon. Let me share my screen. I don't know why it's not letting me, sorry. There we go. Okay, well, good afternoon, and again, I'm really excited to be here to participate in this conversation about legacy businesses. I'm going to provide a really quick overview of the program here in San Antonio. I want to make sure that we have time to answer some of your questions, and so I'll try to be mindful of that. Our program here in San Antonio, much like the one in San Francisco, is really established to acknowledge that these important, long-lived businesses in our community are really an asset, a cultural asset that is worthy of protection, and that's sort of the philosophy that underscores or underlies the program. It is managed in our Living Heritage Division of the Office of Historic Preservation, more specifically by Claudia Guerra, our cultural historian, who I actually think might be listening in today. The program really started as in part as a result of our first Living Heritage Symposium that was held in 2017. Mike and a couple of other people from San Francisco joined us at that first Living Heritage Symposium. And what we learned and what really became an action item out of that symposium was that a program like this, like a legacy business program, would be a best practice for helping to sustain those businesses and really add to the historic character of our city. And in fact, one of the main reasons why we initially hosted the Living Heritage Symposium was tied to the loss of a prominent legacy business. And in this situation, the business was a local landmark. It had been designated for its cultural significance, of course, not architectural. And the family decided to sell. And so there was a lot of angst in the community, understandably, about the loss of that business. And then the question became, how should the building be treated when it was really largely cultural significance that was the reason for the designation. And so, we were acknowledging the fact that oftentimes in preservation, the tools that we have, the design review process and things like that protect these resources, are really tied to the architecture. And so we invited people to come in from around the world to help us kind of grapple with the question of, what do you do when it's not about the architecture necessarily, that the significance is because of something else. And that conversation is what launched our local legacy business program, which is in large part, of course, modeled on what we learned from the San Francisco program. Our program celebrates businesses all over the city that contribute to the culture and to the economy and heritage of our city. You see a picture here. This is Elizondo Flower Shop that has been around since 1921, proudly getting their photo taken with their district council person. This is another example of, this is Bolner's Meat Market, which was established in 1914 with their district councilwoman. Part of the logic behind our program is really helping for the community members to leverage our living heritage for economic prosperity. And in doing that, we need to perpetuate existing businesses, but then also help new businesses develop that kind of perpetuate those traditional trades or other aspects of our San Antonio heritage. You'll notice several of the photos that I'll show throughout, including this one and the previous, include the council member. And that is actually how our program was launched. We officially launched it in 2018, I believe, with 10, because we have 10 council members, and each one picked a legacy business in their district. And that was really how we launched the program, by promoting the legacy businesses in each of those council districts. The criteria here in San Antonio is that a business is generally 20 years of age or older. There are exceptions, but that's the general rule. And then that they also meet one or more of some additional criteria. And those criteria are that the businesses are owned by generations of the same family. So it's something that has been a family business. Providers of authentic goods or services, cultivators and sustainers of San Antonio traditions, and that they're located in a historic district or in a landmark building, or that they're eligible to be designated and willing to designate as as a landmark or inside a district. Essentially, it's about businesses that are owned by successive generations, businesses that perpetuate San Antonio's authenticity through goods or services, like examples being boot makers or hat makers. And then businesses that cultivate traditions such as practices or traditions like ways of knowledge and things like that. So maybe it's not a product, but it's more a service. And in return, of course, we ask the businesses that they, maintain their historic business name and the service that they provide, and that's sort of how we help to perpetuate those businesses. This photo is actually our very first legacy business officially, Del Bravo Records, and they have been in business within the same family since 1966. So what do they get? If approved, a business owner quickly receives a welcome packet from the Office of Historic Preservation. And we similar to San Francisco, have like window decals. You can see her holding the one that she just got in the mail, very excited. This is Paris Hatters in San Antonio since 1917. We also offer the ability to partner with the city of San Antonio in terms of marketing and promotion, educational opportunities, telling people, getting the word out about the businesses, both to the local community and also to visitors by working with like our Visit San Antonio and people and other organizations, special events, and then also access to technical assistance. So resources related to marketing or design, financial resources through other nonprofit organizations or partners, both within the city and outside through assistance grants. And then really during this pandemic, the focus on legacy business has been important through our economic development efforts at the city, and really focusing on those businesses as part of relief packages and scoring for eligibility for grants. We have a website where all the businesses can be, people can search the businesses by category. And so that's something that we're really proud of, because it helps different types of businesses to be highlighted that you might not think about. So there's just a few examples of categories on the screen right now. We also do things like tours, helping to promote. This was just an example of a tour that was done where it was a combination of just go and visit the businesses, but then at each business, they kind of had something special that you were able to get because you were there and on this legacy business tour. We do a great deal of social media. Here's just an example of a post. Of course, we do like kind of feature posts for every new legacy business, but then throughout the year, if things happen, we work to promote those businesses. On the left, you can see a poster that we did for Historic Preservation Month that highlighted each of the legacy businesses in all of the 10 council districts. And so it was a nice way for our elected officials to get involved and to really get behind the program. They're all very excited about it. And so this is just a great way to kind of show that that political support, as Mike mentioned. And then it's important to remember that our program is set up and it is not intended to be regulatory. I mean, it is very much, it doesn't unfortunately guarantee financial incentives. We don't have the same type of incentives that San Francisco has, at least yet. But it also does not regulate. So there are no additional review requirements that are associated. Obviously a lot of these businesses are in local landmarks or local historic districts. So there may be design review requirements because of that designation, but the legacy business recognition itself is not regulatory. And then in terms of next steps, we're looking at expanding to more individual types of people, like master craftsmen, for example. We have a local program here called the Rehabber Club, where we have members that are contractors and people like that work on historic houses, and that's an important part of the legacy of our city. And so helping to identify those types of people. We also are very focused on developing more incentives associated with the program. We did have a segment of our program was eligible for grants if they were in the World Heritage Buffer area near our World Heritage missions. But unfortunately, that program does not have funding currently because a lot of funding has been diverted due to COVID-19 pandemic. But we definitely are working in close connection with our economic development department to identify those additional resources and really just make sure that legacy businesses in existing city programs, it may not be a standalone program, but if you're an identified and designated legacy business, then you get additional points in scoring, things like that, trying to think of creative ways to help provide incentives to these businesses. Also things like tax credits and tax abatements. This is an example of Garcia Art Glass, and this gentleman is a third generation teaching his son, the fourth generation. So it's a great example of the way that livelihood can be passed on. That's actually the end of my presentation. I wanted to be quick. Let me stop sharing my screen, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Mike. Mike, if you can come back, and then Rosalind, if you could join us. We'd like to take some of the questions that have come in, which are really great questions, diversity of questions that have popped up. And I'll just go with one that to start with is kind of obvious. And Mike, are you joining us too? I don't see you yet. We'll start as Mike comes with us, hopefully soon. Is how are the legacy businesses doing due to COVID? What are the impacts, and are these programs serving the need or not?
I mean, I think I would say, of course they're hurting. A lot of them are hurting, like so many businesses all over the place. And I don't feel like what we have isn't enough for anyone, but it's helping. I mean, whatever part we can play to try to promote the businesses, to remind people to go and to patronize these kind of local legacy businesses, I think it helps. And also we feel very strongly about being a resource in that maybe we don't have the financial incentives or exactly what they need, but we have the connections to be able to put them in touch with people. And so we really see ourselves as kind of a way to connect the businesses with the resources that they need.
From San Francisco's perspective, certainly the pandemic has had a dramatic impact on legacy businesses in the city. And to me, it has kind of underscored the lack of resources actually available under our program to meaningfully assist them. It's interesting to note that the origins of the San Francisco program were intended to address skyrocketing rents and increased competition for space and development in San Francisco. The pandemic has kind of turned that on its head, and these businesses are in need of much more than a lease extension right now to survive. They just need funding to maintain their staff and survive this closed period. So what we have done, what San Francisco Heritage has done as an organization, is we have urged the city to really marshal limited resources and use legacy business status as a factor in prioritizing how they allocate limited funds to small businesses in the city. I mean, all are in need. The need is so great that it overwhelms any resources that the city or state might have to assist them. So we are hoping that our elected officials will use the Legacy Business Registry as a resource to determine, identify what is most important to help sustain in our communities.
Okay, we have another question. This question's from Aaron. Has San Francisco or anyone looked into whether there are federal or California state funds that could be used to pay for the landlord grant program for legacy businesses?
No, actually, we haven't. Maybe Erin knows of some possible federal or state resources given her research on this topic. The charter for the program, the bond measure, the ballot measure that was passed by voters in San Francisco provides funding through the general fund of San Francisco, which actually does make it a very vulnerable source of funding. It's difficult to get increases. So any ideas for additional resources for that would be helpful.
Another question that came in is from Yanel, asking about San Francisco's landlord grant. Specifically, I'm wondering if landlords find it worthwhile or if they find more profit in selling out the property, especially the land value is, worth more than the grant itself. So how effective is it enough of an incentive for landlords?
Well, invariably, it's a case-by-case determination. Landlords that have participated in the grant program have, my understanding in many of the leases, there are provisions where if, for example, city funding for the subsidy goes away, then they are not required to honor the full length of the lease term. And there's some exit language in the leases to give them the flexibility if things don't play out as hoped under the program. But in some cases, and Shannon mentioned this earlier in one of the local examples in San Antonio is, oftentimes you'll have a multi-generational business and they just want to retire and sell their property for their family. And, who can really begrudge that? So in cases like that, well, first of all, there's no landlord to incentivize there, but sometimes the value of the property is overwhelming and cannot be matched by any modest local incentive that's available under the program. One thing I failed to mention in my remarks that I think is really noteworthy, and it came through in Shannon's images of businesses, is that the business owners themselves, though, are so proud of their contributions to the community and so proud to have that recognized officially by the city. At our Historic Preservation Commission, which is part of the approval process here in San Francisco for legacy businesses, you will have business owners, multiple generations come testify, and they are so overjoyed to be considered for this honor. And their patrons come and say what those businesses mean to them as a resident of San Francisco. And our Historic Preservation Commissioners love those hearings more than any other in terms of compared to like standard landmark designations or things like that. So that's, I think, a really important factor to this.
Okay, I'll take another question. This is relating to San Francisco again, and noting the ballot proposition. The question is, do you recommend that we attempt a similar ballot proposition within the city, or should this be attempted county-wide? How difficult was it to achieve your support? Was it considered a controversial proposal, or was there general and widespread support?
Those are all great questions, and frankly, on the eve of election day, when it was, we had no idea how it was going to go because we didn't have polling. We didn't know how popular or controversial it might be. I should point out, in terms of that specific question, the San Francisco Chronicle did not endorse the ballot measure. They called it a slush fund for local elected officials who nominate businesses for the Legacy Business Registry. They could go into that, $500 per employee slush fund, and and it was kind of a ridiculous argument because it's such a modest amount of money for each business. So it was considered somewhat controversial in that way, and then also people and kind of presciently question whether the funding would be there to support growth of the program, and that is something that we are grappling with right now. in terms of, I can't, really provide an informed recommendation for what you might do in Los Angeles, but I think it was actually, it's an argument that made itself, that these businesses are the essence, they really define our communities. And just the images that Shannon shared are examples of that. I mean, how could you really be against supporting businesses that have existed for generations and contribute to their communities? So it kind of was a very persuasive argument to voters. I think it resonated with people. And we were surprised by the success. Also, an important dynamic I should note in San Francisco at the time is that our city government was providing subsidies to tech businesses to relocate their headquarters in San Francisco. And one of our more persuasive arguments was that if the city can provide millions of dollars of tax benefits to lure these large corporations into the city, certainly they can throw a bone to the small businesses that have really defined our communities for generations.
Thanks, Mike. We have, I know we're coming close to our end point here, but we have a question for Shannon in San Antonio. A couple of questions. One is like, how did this program start from the city versus a nonprofit or community organization pushing it, which is more of the San Francisco model? And then also, what is the budget or how much funding is available through San Antonio's program?
Sure. I mean, it started from the city. Just, I mean, kind of what I touched on about the malt house, which was the business that was lost. I mean, that was really the impetus for that initial conversation. It was like, maybe the business wouldn't have closed and decided to sell had they had support. And what could that support look like? And both technical assistance and connecting people, but then also hopefully financial resources, all of those things. And so that's what spurred us to invite San Francisco to come and to look at some other models around the world that have been successful in helping to identify those businesses. We do have an excellent relationship with the San Antonio, the Conservation Society of San Antonio, which is a longstanding, well-known preservation organization in the country. And they're very supportive. But luckily, I also have a really fantastic, talented team at the Office of Historic Preservation. And because we are a standalone city department, it gives us some autonomy to kind of develop programs like this. And so it was just something that kind of birthed out of the luck that we have to have that kind of ability to launch programs on the part of the city. In terms of the budget, there isn't one technically. I mean, we have staff, and that is one of their priorities. And so of course the city pays the staff salary, but we don't have a separate budget. And so anything that we do, we work a lot with partners to sponsor things. We raise money through ticket prices and things like that when we host events. So there is not actually a council appropriated budget specific to the Legacy Business Program.
Great, thank you. Russell, do you want last question and then we'll wrap up?
Sure. So the question is from Amy. I want to know how outreach into ethnic communities was conducted and what sort of considerations need to be made for ethnic legacy businesses to be included in these programs. They give examples, Chinatown legacy businesses in San Francisco, etc.
I'm sure Shannon has, I will take a stab at answering quickly, and then I do need to exit, unfortunately, but I failed to mention in my remarks that some important early work in San Francisco's program was part of the cultural district nomination for Japantown. And through that process, consultants like Donna Graves, working with Page and Turnbull, developed a social heritage inventory form, which was really the first kind of structured way to evaluate significant social heritage sites. And so there was a lot of outreach done in conjunction with that cultural district nomination, as well as other cultural districts in the city that tend to be in ethnic communities, including the Calle 24, a Latino cultural district, which includes many dozens of eligible and listed legacy businesses. And in that case, San Francisco Heritage has partnered with Calle 24, the organization associated with the cultural district, to do outreach to business owners and collaborate on legacy business registry nominations. It's really important to whenever possible, partner with a local organization that has the trust of the community.
Great. Thank you, Mike. I know you have to drop off for another.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Good to see some familiar faces and names.
And with that, we have way more questions than we can possibly answer all right now, but we will make a commitment to address each and every one of those and respond to all of you as participants, because we do want to answer the questions. And we want to leave one again, thanking Mike and thanking Shannon for taking part in sharing kind of the programs from San Francisco and San Antonio. But also, we really want a program in Los Angeles, and we may have to take some baby steps to get there so that we could be a San Francisco one day or beyond. But it's really critical, I think, that everyone reaches out to their council office. That's one step, and really indicate that we want a program. We want a way to support our legacy businesses. And also, we will make sure everyone is following how things progress with the motion that's currently pending the city council. And as that moves forward, we will certainly encourage you all to take action and get involved in that. And then lastly, for all of our beloved legacy businesses out there, support them. Shop there, do your takeout there, do your dry cleaning, whatever you have to do. They need it more than ever right now. And it's really about them and their stories, and really propping them up, especially now more than ever, so that they can survive. But again, thank you all for taking part. Thank Rosalind for her work on this. Thank you again, Shannon and everyone. But have a good day. Thank you all.